Welcome back for another video. I'm Eharbad, and in this video we're going to be talking about the state of the game in 2023. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that I might make this video, and there seemed to be pretty reasonable interest in me making it. And I've had obviously ample opportunity to sit down, write some ideas, come up with a coherent plan on what I want to say and how I want to say it. But I haven't done any of that. So we're just gonna go ahead and ad lib it, and hopefully I'll get my point across coherently. I think to be able to talk about the game in its current form, I think it would be most useful if we go back and look at some of the history of the game. So really, when you first start playing the game, you've got campaign and you've got 4 different difficulties. Nightmare maybe isn't perfectly balanced in terms of reward, but from a gameplay perspective, I think the campaign works well. You've got different obstacles or different power checks along the way, and ultimately the intention is to get to Brutal 12-3 and be able to farm that consistently to rank up champions and overall develop and progress your account. And it works well in that regard because you put time in and you will get advancement out. So it's a kind of a fair exchange in that regard. Now, if we look at the other parts, dungeons, generally the artifact dungeons, I think work well. Again, you've got generally interesting sets available in most of them, and you can iterative optimize the account as it goes. Now, in terms of the big key parts of the account, I don't know why this keeps coming up as 132 tournament points, just over and over. It must have queued up a load of stuff when I was ranking up champions. Anyway, I digress. Clan boss, that's where I'd say, once you've got campaign and dungeons in tandem, clan boss is kind of the biggest piece of content that was available back when I started the game. And again, it's really well balanced between the actual game mechanics, so the encounter is interesting and the reward is good. And that's kind of what I'm thinking of throughout the history of the game as campaign. The mechanics are varied enough, easy enough that you can get to the point where you're able to farm it efficiently and quickly, and you know what the reward is. You'll ultimately progress your account, and therefore it's well balanced. I'd say the same for the regular dungeons. They have very unique skill mechanics, and then with the Demon Lord, again, really interesting encounter. So much you can do, so many varied teams can be used ultimately to beat Ultra Nightmare, and it works well. There's a lot you can do. I'm just using a classic kind of Bat-Eater with Feign. I could probably do a higher damage team on my account, but you don't have to use Unkillable. There's a lot of options. It's still an area of the game that provides people with a lot of interest, and ultimately the rewards are, really some of the best rewards in the game come from Clan Boss in terms of resource acquisition. Really, really good balanced piece of content. Then they introduced faction wars, and really interesting again. You've got power checks across the various stages. You've got 3 boss stages, of which usually stage 14 and 21 provide quite a good challenge, and some of the interim stages can have some really interesting compositional elements in terms of what the enemies are. And ultimately, the rewards, again, are good. Glyphs, really impactful. RNG on them is a bit annoying, but the actual mechanic of the glyph improving your existing pieces of gear in a not necessarily determined way, but in a controlled way. You elect exactly how you want to improve your items of gear, which stats, and to a certain degree by how much. And then, you can optimize these teams. I at some point really should actually add Vlad in here and speed my team up, which is something I will do. And you can get to the point where you're optimizing your teams. You know you're going to get consistent rewards from your effort, and beyond glyphs, the addition of the Forge was enormous. But we'll circle back to that. After Faction Wars, we then got Doom Tower. Again, a fantastic piece of content, both normal and hard side. You've got various stages all the way along. You've got interesting boss mechanics in each rotation. You've got really good rewards coming from various things such as books, energy, shards, and then ultimately towards the top end, you get the really high value ones: void shards, sacred shards, legendary tomes. Each rotation, we're looking at really good rewards. The secret rooms, I think they messed up on, but initially there are some good champions to come from it. Overall, the idea or the concept is solid. There's good varied content here. It's rewarding, it's engaging, and I think it was very well received. Now, once we go past Doom Tower, I think the next thing they added of note would have been Hydra. Bit more of a mixed bag. Yeah, definitely a little bit more mixed. I'd say after they nerfed it or tweaked it such that Provoke could control the Decay Head, it became a much more tactical and interesting battle, and ultimately opened up the roster options quite a lot. And then in terms of rewards, this is where it's a little bit more subjective. They added 2 new sets that kind of dominate the game to a certain degree. Mithrala obviously was amazing, and beyond that, it's where things start to turn, basically. So if you think back, campaign, dungeons, traditional dungeons that is, clan boss, faction wars, all fantastically implemented. Doom Tower, brilliantly implemented. Hydra's where cracks started to show. And I would say, we'll have to include with Doom Tower the Forge. The Forge was fantastic. The ability to craft particularly perception, but in addition resilience, and some of the Doom Tower sets such as Untouchable, Guardian, even to a certain degree Lethal, but less so. I mean, Lethal's an improved version of Savage. But if we think about Guardian particularly, this opened up whole new sets of the game. And Perception as well really revolutionized the game in terms of accessibility for people to be able to build the stats required to beat, endgame content. It really changed the game. Each of those areas really changed the game. Faction Wars introduced glyphs, game changing. Doom Tower introduced the Forge, plus some of the earlier Doom Tower champions, plus all these Doom Tower sets, really changed the game, shook it up completely. Like I said, with Hydra, it's when things started going a bit awry with Stone Skin and with Stone Skin and Protection sets, kind of creating a bit of an odd arena meta, and did kind of create some options for cheesing bits of content, but didn't really have a lot of time or use within PvE. Very much PvP sets. Let's just quickly do one of these whilst we continue talking. So yeah, with Hydra, that's when things started to take a little bit of a turn, and we kind of continued in that direction with the introduction of the dupe system. And the dupe system, flagged a lot of concerns in terms of the direction of the game. Basically being able to get huge amount of stat gain by crunching legendary only duplications to empower champions was kind of the start of a huge amount of stat bloat that occurred thereafter. Previously, the new mechanics that were added into the game didn't increase the overall stat values by that much. Lethal added a little bit more max stat capability versus Savage. Perception added a little bit more stat capability versus an accuracy set. But these were small gains overall, whereas Empowerment created a huge acceleration in stats and therefore power. Stone Skin and Hydra also introduced Mythical, which creates another layer of RNG, and personally, more and more RNG on gear acquisition actually reduces the interest and excitement to continue to farm something. I think if you can, an equivalency would be Diablo 4, where one of the complaints people have at the moment in endgame, from what I've understood, is that between, say, level 80 and 100, the gear acquisition becomes so slow, i.e. the potential chance of getting an upgrade becomes so slow, it begins to feel like a waste of time. And that's kind of the issue, I would say, with current state of raid, but we'll swing back to how that is. Essentially what I'm saying is that if you have too much RNG in terms of your ability to progress, things get boring. And that's ultimately what I think with Mythical. It's also what I think with Iron Twins. So Iron Twins was the next thing they added, and with Iron Twins, not only do you have a boss encounter that mechanically is not interesting, it's not well balanced to enable a huge range of strategies and champions. It's, for the most part, do you have Geomancer? If you don't have a Geomancer, there's just no point you bothering. It's too slow and painful to consistently beat the final stage of that boss. And then even if you do have Geomancer and you do have a well-tuned team, the majority of which people use Unkillable, because to fight it in a traditional sense is painful and inconsistent, i.e. it's not a well-balanced, well-tuned, interesting boss encounter, unlike Clan Boss, unlike Faction Wars, unlike the traditional dungeons. They even got the encounter bad. I would say the encounter with Hydra is actually well thought out, and it does, since they made the tweaks in terms of Decay Head particularly, it does allow a broad range of champions. It's a bit narrow compared to other parts of the game, but it's fairly broad. Iron Twins is extremely narrow, realistically. If you want to be able to beat that boss in any reasonable time, it's Geomancer, and that's not good game design. So here's the first instance where we have a bad game design in terms of the content itself, but also questionable game design in terms of the reward. There's a lot of videos that have been made about the reward from Iron Twins, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but suffice to say, you don't get enough for the energy you in each day in terms of coins and essences, and then from summoning shards, it's too much RNG and the shop is too expensive. So in terms of defined, knowing that you're going to progress over time, it ends up feeling like a lot of a waste of time, to be honest. And that's sad. I think I've already done my Iron Twins today, so I can't actually show you. It's Void Day, so I do actually use the energy to buy the refill. Yeah, so you end up with the soul summons, and then typically you don't end up summoning anything that is worthwhile. It's been out, I think, about a year now. And if we look across my roster, as Granted, I am free to play, so obviously you can spend to get faster progress and to get more souls. But we're not talking about a lot of souls here. I bought Seer through the shop up to 6-star. But in terms of actual usable souls across my champions, most of them are a 1-star, a couple of 2-stars, and quite a lot actually at 0. A lot of the epics 2-star. So it's like, realistically, what you'd have to play for many, many years or spend a lot of money. And it's that same element that we discussed about if the RNG gets too extreme, at what point does it end up feeling like a waste of time? And that's kind of where Iron Twins runs the risk of being a bit of a waste of time. But anyway, so we've had Empowerment and Iron Twins. And then beyond that, we get Sand Devil. Now, much like Iron Twins, is this actual encounter interesting? And I would say no. To be able to do this in a meaningful time, i.e. quick enough and with a high enough win rate, i.e. 100%, because there's no point having a team that doesn't win 100% when you're expending so much energy. It's there aren't that many options. Again, it's really narrow. To create a piece of content where, for the most part, people are looking at Godseeker and a damage dealer, or Chronum with Jamasa. That's pretty much it. There's a couple of different damage dealer options you can pair with Godseeker, but we're really talking about a handful of champions versus a pool of, I don't even know how many nowadays, like 600, let's say. But we're talking like a large pool of champions in this game, and we've now got Sand Devil plus Iron Twins that are extremely narrow focus. Now, again, I did a video back at the time that talked about the rewards that comes from Sand Devil, so I won't talk about it too much in this video, but suffice to say, it's another layer of RNG on existing RNG, and I don't think it's particularly well implemented, shall we say. But moreover, it yet again increases the stat bloat. So we've got stats coming from Empowerment, we've now got stats coming from the Iron Twins, from the Blessings, we've got stats coming from Sand Devil, and that acceleration of stat bloat versus what we had previously. If you look at those 2 years of adding glyphs via faction wars, and then the long time between that and adding the improved sets via Doom Tower, you had stat growth over time, but it was paced quite slowly. And then in the 3rd year of the game, roughly, you ended up with Mythical from Hydra, you ended up with Empowerment from dupes, only legendaries, and then you ended up with Blessings, and then Gear Ascension. It's a lot of stat bloat in a very short period of time. And then you have to ask yourself, for what? None of the existing really well balanced, interesting content received harder versions, really. So, not that they necessarily need them. We didn't get a harder version of Campaign, but we don't need it. We didn't get a harder version of Clan Boss, but again, we don't really need it. We haven't even got a harder version of Hydra. Again, do we actually need it? What would it look like? We'll leave that for a time being. So the only bit of harder content we've got in inverted commas is Arena gets harder because it's based on people power. So again, we can put that to one side for a second. Faction Wars have had no additional level of difficulty, nor has Doom Tower, all of which existed. So the only thing they've added where we can use these stats are hard modes of dungeons. And what can you say about the hard modes of dungeons? Why would you bother running them? I mean, I do run them because there's no reason not to versus normal. But if we take a look kind of holistically and think about it, the probability of getting a 6-star mythical is so low that the number of usable 6-star mythical pieces you're going to get is so low. And then you have to ascend it as well and hit the right stats. Again, so low that it's that, yes, it's possible, but the degree of RNG on RNG on RNG, this is one of the few pieces I'm actually using. Another piece here where we've got some good rolls, and another one there. Like, you will end up using them, but how many? And does it really make a big difference to the game? PvE, not massively. To a certain degree, you could argue it actually trivializes some of the old content that had those power check levels. But it ultimately just makes PvP more of a mess. And it's the degrees of RNG. It's not like you can say, well, okay, mythical gear now exists, so I'll get the ability to consistently upgrade the more I run those dungeons. Well, to a degree, but you're getting so few pieces that once you run the numbers in terms of how much energy it's realistically going to take you to get one single upgrade, you'll realize it's actually very, very low chances you'll get a better gear. And it comes back to that Diablo 4 argument. Once you get to a point that the number of times you have to repeat the same action gets too great, at what point do you say this is becoming a waste of time? And that's really kind of where I feel endgame Raid Shadow Legends is right now, is that the rewards coming from the main pieces of content, be it hard dungeons, be it Iron Twins, be it Sand Devil's Necropolis, the amount of time, energy, and effort you've got to put in to these parts of the game to get tangible gains and improvements in your account is lopsided versus all the great content that existed in the game previously. For me, Doom Tower is the best piece of content in the game, bar none. In fact, let's just get these super raids done. It's the best piece of content in the game. I would then say Clan Boss is the next best piece of content. Probably after that, I would say Faction Wars is the next piece of content. And what's interesting about my top 3 content areas of the game, they were all made more than a year ago, predominantly between 2 and 3 years ago. All of the stuff that's been added in the last year, I think, is some of the worst content in the game, either because the actual boss encounters are not good, or, they're not interesting, they're too narrow in terms of what champions you can use. Iron Twins, very narrow. Do you have a Geomancer or not? That's the check. Sand Devil, do you have Godseeker, basically, is the main check. Do you or not? If you don't, well, forget it. Realistically. The other one is, do you have a Krazier? And then the hard dungeons, fine, do you have Cardiel and Valkyrie? If you don't have both of them, forget it. There's just no point. You're not going to be farming stage 10. But then even if you were able, say you've got all those champions, and you're able to farm Iron Twins, Sand Devil, and all the hard stages of the dungeons, for what? The RNG involved in getting those improvements is so remote. But also, what content are you trying to work towards? You've already beaten all the PvE content. There is no new challenge. They haven't added a new challenge for you to be working on. It used to be that you were farming those dungeons to improve your clan boss team, to progress further in the Doom Tower, to finish faction wars. You had defined objectives that you wanted to continue to improve your account, diversify your roster, because you had a lot of challenges to beat. And you needed breadth of gear, breadth of champions, and you needed generally to increase your power level to be able to overcome those challenges. But we haven't had new challenges other than areas in which to get more stats. But what are we getting those stats for? It's almost like self-fulfilling at this point. There's not new Doom Tower. There's not like a new ultra hard setting in Doom Tower where we could be using some of these new champions. The power creep we've had in terms of the champions, we can't be using those. We can't be using the power creep in terms of stats. I mean, what are we trying to achieve at this point? Like, okay, Victor Tez could maybe soon do 2 billion against Clan Boss. Maybe someone on auto on Hydra could do, I don't know what the record is. Maybe it's about 250, 300. Maybe someone will end up doing 500 million on Nightmare Hydra. But it becomes a bit redundant at a certain point. Almost like what are we trying to get the improvements for at this point? You can say Arena. Wow, Live Arena, I think they really missed the boat in terms of the way it was implemented. I don't enjoy it at all. That's a personal opinion, and I'm trying, not to focus too much on my own individual opinions or my own individual account or circumstances, but talk more abstract or more holistically about the game. So, classic Arena, you don't need great amount of stats to be able to sit in Gold 5. The way they tweaked the game to rebalance it, in inverted commas, essentially enabling nearly the entire the entire like player base to be in Gold 5 means you don't really need to get any of this extra power level to be able to compete in Classic Arena. Tag team has become horrendous above Gold 2, to be honest, Gold 3 and Gold 4, because of all these stat increases, not to mention the Marishka and Taras meta. Tag teams become just not fun, and I used to really like tag team. Like, I'm one of the few content creators that put out a load of tag team videos. I used to really enjoy the strategy and the challenge of staying in Gold 4. But then, having done that for a year, and with the meta getting more and more narrow and focused, and like the acceleration or the inflation of the stats and the narrowing of the viable champion pool when they continued to release more powerful champions, particularly Taras and Marishka, has kind of ruined tag team. For the same reasons, Live Arena is ruined for me. And then what's the other main area that I used to find quite interesting would be looking for, that's not the best one, looking at how can I go faster and faster take fewer turns, basically, in Doom Tower. I quite enjoyed that for a short while. I'm not high enough up in this Doom Tower because it's just reset, but essentially this champion here, Acrisia, ruined that. If you don't have Acrisia, you might as well not bother trying. Essentially, you will never get the fewest turns on these dungeons in Doom Tower if you don't have Acrisia. For the majority of the dungeons, for the majority of the boss encounters. And then it's like, for what? And same problem in secret rooms. Like, I don't really care about this particular iteration of the sets that are involved, so I won't save this for later. Let's just chuck a load of champions in. Let's just put you on whatever. I don't have enough silver keys. Never mind. I was going to run it just to show you, but essentially I've got all of the secret room champions asked or rust. I haven't used any of them. I think a bunch of them are still sat in the fragment legendaries. People like Val, Jinro, Gronjar, Chromax, they're all just terrible champions, to be honest. And then, even if I look at the ones that I have got, I think most of them are either in reserve vault or whatever. Just not interesting. And that's the problem with the secret rooms. And then once you've done all those, you get more forge materials. And again, forge materials become at a certain point extremely diminishing returns. You can just keep crafting, and the chance of me now getting an upgrade in perception is like really, really low. But moreover, they've now added mythical gear, but there's no way to get mythical perception. There's no way to get mythical lethal. To the point that you're like, well, what am I farming Doom Tower for? Once I've, done the actual floors all the way up to 120, got all these guaranteed rewards. Why am I bothering to farm anymore? Because I can't even craft. Haven't even had the chance to craft mythical to compete with what's coming out of the hard dungeons. So it's like the game used to be really, really well balanced, really strategic, and I feel like you could come up with loads of different approaches to beat all the original content that was extremely well balanced in terms of the game mechanics that the content had and also the rewards that the content gave. And then in the last year, I feel like that balance has been missed. We now have content that is much more narrow in terms of what you can actually bring to the table to beat it, how you can tackle that content. But moreover, to do so is not rewarding. At least that's my personal opinion. And, feel free in the comments to tell me all the reasons why I'm wrong. But that's my view. And I think that's why I've been making less content this year than last year, excluding obviously the trip that I took last year. But I've been making less content because I'm getting a bit disillusioned with the game, to be honest. I probably will have a break at some point. I'm continuing to do both accounts, but it's becoming a bit burdensome, to be honest. So I'm going to have to think about pausing one of them, definitely. I'd probably enjoy the challenge account more than I do the main. I think there's still some unfinished challenges in the challenge account that I'd like to overcome, but I'm worried about the direction of the game overall. And something that Plarium have already said themselves in their own, which I saw on Hell Hades' video, in their own, accounts filings for the shareholders, is that Raid Shadow Legends is in profit mode, which to me suggests that they're not looking to add any material content to the game, or it would be unlikely that they'll add anything big. There won't be like another Doom Tower level of content added. And they're most likely going to find ways to maximize the money they can make from the game for the remainder of its life, whilst putting as little resources into the game, basically maximize profitability, which is obviously great from a commercial perspective for them, but as a game for the long-term player that's been around for a long time, it's probably not the best situation for a customer or a consumer, even someone who is free to play as myself. I might not spend on the game, But I do spend a lot of time on the game, and I value my time probably even more than I value my money. Anyway, that's all for this video. Like I said, in the comments, tell me why I'm wrong. Equally, if you do agree with what I'm saying, then tell me that as well. But that pretty much sums up the state of the game for me. I feel like they constructed a game that had fantastic balance between challenge, complexity, diversity, and reward. And now, with the more recent additions, some of that has been lost. So as always, thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now.